Hi, my name is Dr. Benedict R. Gaster, and I work at the University of West of England. And this is the second part in a short series of videos about version control and one particular source control system called Git. For the other videos, please feel free to check out the webpage, and if you haven't already watched part one, I highly recommend that you do that before continuing. So version controls. In the first video, we talked about what a version control system is and why you might want to use one. It's a system that allows you to record changes, particularly to source files, but it could be any type of file over time. And by saving those changes and recording those changes, we can recall specific versions later. Maybe we saved one yesterday or the day before, or even a month or a year or many years ago, and we can recall those versions for inspection to see, how things have changed. Maybe we want to go back to an earlier release to detect a bug that someone's reported, and so on. Another really useful feature is that it allows collaboration between multiple teams of people. If it's just a single file worked on by a single person, then source control systems can still add something, version control, but it really comes into its own once you have multiple teams of people, in particular developers, for example, working on and sharing source files in a project. Some of the key features of version control include, but not limited to, backup and restore. Files are saved as they are edited. You can jump to any change at any moment in time. Now, of course, that means you do need to have checked in, or what we call committed, those changes so the system knows about them. But assuming that you've done that, you can then recall a file or a change at any time. So for example, maybe I needed that file that was on February the 1st, 2015. Then it's no problem. You can just ask the system to recall the changes and the check-ins that were made on that day, either to a particular file or to a whole set of files. One of the other key features of version control is that it is what's called synchronization. This allows people to share files and stay up to date with the latest version of particular files in the system. You don't have to pick up all those changes, you just can. So imagine you just come back from a long plane flight from Australia, say for example, and you've landed back at home, you've finally woken up, and you say, okay, I need to check to see if there's any changes to those files. And you go to your system, you look and you see there's a change, and you can ask it to synchronize, and it will automatically update any changes to the files, and you can rebuild your system and you'll be on the latest version. And before we had version control systems, you might say, how can I share a file with my colleague Craig, for example? I might want to share a file with him to let him work on it, and so he'll come by to my office and tell me not to work on it. And I'll say, but how will I know? How will I remember? And then what we decided was that we could have this little pebble, and the little pebble represented a particular source file. I gave Craig the pebble. He wandered off, added some bugs to the code that later on we'd need to unwind. But for now, he was working on it because I didn't have the pebble on my desk. And then he'd bring the pebble back and say it's done. And then I'd synchronize, i.e. pick up the file. I'd now have the pebble, and so he would no longer be allowed to work on it. Of course, at that point, I discovered he'd introduced 2 or 3 bugs. And so then I'd have to go back and give him the pebble, maybe write a little piece of note on a post-it note to say that what the problem was. So this is not the most efficient system. Version control is a way of making this process much more efficient. It allows Craig to be based in the United Kingdom while I live in France, for example, and so on. We could do those sorts of things, and we could still synchronize virtually to make that happen. Some other features is that we get short-term undo. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to try out some ideas. I very much work and develop by prototyping. So I try a new idea and I've messed up the file. It no longer works, or it doesn't do what I wanted, and I want to throw that away. So that's fine. We can just throw those changes away and go back to what's known as the last good version. And the database has a record of that, and so I can just pull it up. Maybe that'll be a local version that I committed only locally, or it could be a version that's synchronized, so Craig could pick up that, and we both agree that it's the last known good version, and we can go backwards and forwards between that. Long-term undo, well, it might turn out that something that we've developed, maybe Craig introduced a bug a few months back, and we didn't realize until now, and we need to go back and find that bug, and we need to actually undo those changes that he added to introduce those. And to do that, we can unwind it using long-term undo. We can jump back to any older version and see when that change was made and how the bug was introduced, for example. So of course, this all comes down to the ability to track changes. As files are updated, you can leave messages explaining why that change has happened, and you can store this in the version control system, not in the file itself. And so the version control system can provide this information to you. This makes it easy to see how a file is evolving over time and why. You can generate reports if you wanted to, but in particular, you can look back over the history and see how things have changed and why. Of course, we want to track ownership. A version control system tags every change with the name of the person who made it. This is clearly helpful for giving credit, and in Craig's case, it's helpful for knowing that he introduced the bug. And sandboxing, or you might call this insurance against yourself, your own mistakes. If you're making a big change, you can make this isolated from anyone else. You're not damaging other people's workflow or changes. You can do that in your own. If you want to change it, throw it away later. But you can, isolate and work in a testing environment that allows you to work just on a single change. So this is what we call sandboxing. Branching and merging. This is, I suppose, in some concepts, a larger sandbox. You can take a whole copy of your work, which is called a branch, put it into a separate area, modify it, we'll keep working on it, integrate changes from other people, maybe check Craig has made a change that I need to pick up, so I can bring that back in. And then later, I can merge these changes back into the common area that is shared for all to work on. And I no longer need that branch, and I could delete that branch. And we'll see how to do all of these types of things in a particular source control system called Git in a later video.